The sound started 3 months after Marcus moved back home. At first, I thought it was birds nesting in the eaves, scratching, rustling, the occasional thump that sounded too heavy for sparrows but too light for raccoons. My house, a 1920 Victorian in Boston Edison, had sheltered 3 generations of Williams' family, and every old house has its sounds. You learn to distinguish between settling foundation and something that needs attention. But these sounds were different. They came from the attic, and Marcus had made it very clear that the attic was off limits. "Mom, I'm serious," he'd said 2 years ago when he first moved in, hauling boxes up the narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. "The attic's dangerous. There's structural damage to the roof. Exposed nails, rotting floorboards. I'm working on getting it fixed. But until then, you can't go up there. Promise me." I'd promised because he was my son, because he'd shown up at my door saying he'd lost his job and his apartment and needed somewhere to stay just temporarily. Because after 61 years, I'd learned that sometimes loving your children means giving them the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt is warranted. That was 2 years ago. The temporary had become permanent, and the attic remained locked. Marcus had installed a deadbolt, industrial grade, the kind you'd use on a business property, said it was for my safety, to keep me from accidentally going up there and falling through damaged floor. I'd accepted that explanation because I wanted to believe my son was protecting me, not hiding something from me. But the sounds kept getting louder. Tonight, lying in my bedroom directly below the attic, I heard voices, not TV voices or music, actual conversation, muffled but unmistakable. A woman speaking Spanish, rapid and urgent, a child crying. Then Marcus's voice, sharp and commanding. "Keep it down. I told you, no noise after 9. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from." My heart was pounding. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, 2:47 a.m., and considered calling. Who? The police? To report what exactly? That my son was making noise in his workspace? Because that's what Marcus claimed the attic was, a home recording studio where he was building his music production business. He'd shown me equipment once, expensive-looking mixers and microphones he said he'd bought with money from freelance work, told me he was working with local artists, needed the space soundproofed and private. "The clients don't want anyone hearing their tracks before release," he'd explained. "Industry secret stuff, Mom. You understand." I'd understood because I'd wanted to understand, because Marcus had struggled since losing his marketing job 3 years ago, had tried various entrepreneurial ventures that never quite worked out, and I wanted to believe he'd finally found something successful. But recording sessions don't happen at 2:47 a.m. with crying children and urgent Spanish. I lay awake until dawn, listening to movement overhead, footsteps, water running through pipes that fed the bathroom Marcus had installed up there, voices that rose and fell in rhythms that sounded nothing like music production. At breakfast, Marcus came down looking exhausted. He was 37, but lately looked older. Circles under his eyes, hair thinning at the crown, that particular weariness of someone carrying weight they can't share. "Rough night?" I asked, pouring coffee into the mug I'd given him for his 10th birthday, still in use 27 years later. "Just a long session. Client wanted changes to the track." He added cream and sugar, stirring methodically. "Sorry if we kept you up." "Marcus, I heard a child crying." His hand stilled on the spoon. "What?" "Last night, around 3 a.m., I heard a child crying from the attic." "Oh, that," he laughed, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, the artist I'm working with wanted to sample their kid's voice. Authentic sound, you know. Kid got fussy during recording. At 3 in the morning? Artists keep weird hours, Mom." He finished his coffee in 3 gulps, stood to leave. "I gotta run. Meeting with a potential client downtown. Don't wait up for dinner." He was gone before I could ask more questions, the front door closing with a finality that felt deliberate. I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd raised Marcus, where my late husband James and I had hosted Sunday dinners for 30 years before his heart attack took him from me 8 years ago, and felt like a stranger in my own home. The house was quiet now, too quiet for 8 a.m. on a Thursday. Usually I'd hear Marcus moving around upstairs, running water, listening to music. But this morning, there was nothing except the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and my own breathing. I walked to the attic door, locked as always, ran my fingers over the deadbolt Marcus had installed, tested it without really thinking. Solid, industrial, impossible to open without the key that Marcus kept on his person at all times. Through the door, I heard nothing, but I knew, with the certainty that comes from 35 years of working with people as a librarian, that something on the other side of that door needed my attention. I just didn't know what, or how bad it would be when I finally found out. 3 days later, Marcus announced he was leaving town. Business trip, he said, packing a weekend bag with the kind of clothes you don't wear to music industry meetings. Work boots, old jeans, a jacket with paint stains. Client in Cleveland wants to check out my portfolio in person. Big opportunity, Mom. Could be the break I need. How long will you be gone? 3 days, maybe 4. He kissed my cheek, something he rarely did anymore. You'll be okay here alone? I know you don't like staying by yourself. I'll be fine, I said. Though he was right, I didn't like being alone in this big house since James died. But I was 61 years old, a retired librarian who'd spent decades managing large systems and difficult patrons. I could handle a few days alone. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. Don't go in the attic, Marcus said as he headed to the door. Seriously, Mom, I had to shore up some of the flooring, but it's still not safe. Promise me you won't try to go up there. I promise, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth, because I'd already decided. The moment Marcus's car pulled away from the curb, I was going up there. I was going to find out what my son had been hiding for 2 years, and I was going to deal with whatever I found, no matter how much it hurt to face the truth about my only child. Marcus left at noon. By 12:15, I was standing at the attic door with a hammer and a screwdriver, preparing to destroy the lock my son had installed to keep me out of my own house. The sounds from above had started again, soft crying, whispered conversation in Spanish, the shuffle of many feet on old wooden floors. Whatever was up there, it was about to become my problem, and Marcus's reckoning. The lock was harder to break than I'd anticipated. I'd watched YouTube videos on my phone, standing in the third-floor hallway with tools from James's old workshop spread at my feet. The hammer, the screwdriver, the pry bar I'd found rusting in the basement. Instruments of revelation, though I didn't yet know what I'd reveal. The deadbolt was industrial grade, meant for commercial properties, not residential homes. Marcus had anchored it deep into the doorframe with screws that looked like they could hold through a hurricane. Every attempt to pry it loose just made my arms ache and my resolve waver. Maybe he's right. Maybe it really is dangerous up there. Maybe I should wait until he gets back, ask him properly to show me. But then I heard it again, a child's voice, young, maybe 5 or 6 years old, singing softly in Spanish. A lullaby I recognized from my library days when I'd run bilingual story time. Arroro mi niño. Children didn't belong in recording studios at 1 p.m. on a Thursday. Children belonged in schools, in playgrounds, in safe places with adequate supervision. Whatever was happening in my attic, it wasn't music production. I wedged the pry bar deeper into the gap between door and frame, threw all my weight against it. The door frame cracked, a sound like breaking bones, and the deadbolt tore free with a screech of splintering wood. The door swung inward. Heat hit me first. The attic was like an oven, August in Detroit turning the space beneath my roof into something close to a sauna. The smell came next. Bodies, cooking, cleaning products, the particular scent of too many people in too small a space. Then I saw them. 4 families, 14 people total. I'd count later. Crammed into the 800-square-foot attic space that ran the length of my house. Makeshift partitions created from hanging sheets divided the space into sections. Rooms where mattresses covered the floor, where belongings were stored in plastic bins, where lives had been compressed into corners. A woman stood nearest to me, maybe 30 years old, dark hair pulled back, eyes wide with fear. Behind her, 3 children huddled on a mattress, the singer I'd heard. A boy who looked about 8, a baby who couldn't have been more than 18 months. Please, the woman whispered in accented English. Please don't call police. Por favor, señora. We have nowhere else. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was seeing. The attic I'd been forbidden from entering wasn't a recording studio. It was a boarding house. An illegal, overcrowded, dangerous boarding house carved into the top floor of my family home. How many of you are there? I finally managed. 4 families, another woman said, stepping forward from one of the sheet-divided sections. She was older, maybe mid-40s, wearing a server's uniform from a restaurant chain I recognized. 14 people total. We pay Marcus rent, cash, every month. How much? $2,000. Each family. $8,000 a month. Marcus had been collecting $8,000 monthly in cash, exploiting people who couldn't complain because of their immigration status, while telling me he was barely scraping by. How long? I asked. How long have you been up here? 2 years. The first woman, I'd learn her name was Rosa, said quietly. Since Marcus first moved back in, he found us through someone who helps people like us find places. Said his mother's attic was available. quiet, safe. Said you knew about us and were okay with it. The betrayal hit like a fist. I didn't know. I had no idea anyone was up here. Rosa's face crumpled. We worried sometimes that you didn't know. But Marcus said you were old, that you didn't come upstairs anymore, that you'd signed papers giving him control of the property. Power of attorney. Last year, Marcus had convinced me to sign a limited power of attorney so he could handle home repairs and improvements. I thought I was making life easier for both of us. Instead, I'd given him legal cover to turn my home into an exploitation engine. I looked around the attic more carefully now, cataloging the reality of what my son had created. One bathroom for 14 people, the toilet visible through a partially open door, a hot plate and microwave serving as kitchen for 4 families, extension cords snaking across the floor, fire hazards waiting to happen, windows covered with blankets to prevent neighbors from seeing in, no emergency exit beyond the single staircase I'd just climbed. The children, I said, do they go to school? No, Rosa admitted. Marcus said it was too dangerous, that if teachers asked questions, immigration would find us. So we teach them here. Reading, math, what we can. And work? You all work? The woman in the restaurant uniform nodded. I work nights at Denny's. Rosa cleans houses. The men work construction, landscaping, whatever they can find that pays cash. We leave before dawn, come back after dark, try to be quiet so you don't hear us. I thought about the sounds I'd dismissed as birds or settling house. Those were people, families, living above me in conditions that would shame any decent human being. And Marcus had created this, my son, the boy I'd raised to value justice and dignity and the inherent worth of every person. Where are the men now? I asked. Working. They'll be back after sunset. I pulled out my phone. Rosa flinched, thinking I was calling immigration or police. Instead, I sat down on the floor. My knees couldn't hold me anymore, and began taking photographs. The cramped conditions, the makeshift kitchen, the children's sleeping area where stuffed animals and books were crammed between mattresses. What are you doing? Rosa asked, her voice shaking. Documenting, I said, because what's happening here is illegal. Not your presence, my son's exploitation of you, the housing violations, the fire hazards, the fact that he's charging you $2,000 a month to live in an attic with 1 bathroom and no emergency exits. Please, Senora, if you report this, they'll deport us. Our children. I'm not calling immigration, I interrupted, but I am going to fix this, all of it. The question is, do you trust me? Rosa looked at the other families, a silent conversation happening in glances I couldn't interpret. Finally, she turned back to me. You're not Marcus, she said simply. So yes, we trust you more than we trust him. I spent the next 2 hours in that sweltering attic, learning names and stories. Rosa from Honduras, fleeing gang violence with her 3 children. Maria and her husband Carlos from Guatemala, their 2 teenagers sleeping during the day because they worked night shifts with their parents. The Janvier family from Haiti, Jerome, his wife Nadine, and their baby daughter Sophie. And the Ramirez family from El Salvador, an elderly couple and their adult son with disabilities, all of them paying Marcus's extortion to avoid sleeping on the streets. Each family had been promised temporary refuge, a place to save money, a stepping stone to better circumstances. Instead, they'd been trapped in my attic for 2 years, living in conditions that violated every housing code Detroit had on the books. Marcus said if we complained, he'd call immigration. Rosa explained. He has our real names, our countries of origin, sometimes copies of documents we showed him thinking he needed them for lease agreements. He said 1 phone call and we'd all be deported, separated from our children, sent back to places where we'd be killed. He lied, I said, about so much. But here's the truth. You have rights. Even undocumented immigrants have rights under U.S. law. You have the right to safe housing, to not be exploited, to protect your children, and I'm going to make sure you get those rights. How? Maria asked. You're one person. Marcus has the papers, the control. I'm one person who spent 35 years as a librarian, helping people navigate systems designed to confuse them, I corrected. I know how to research, how to find resources, how to connect people with help. And I know a lot of lawyers, social workers, advocates who owe me favors from years of volunteer work. I stood, my knees protesting. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going downstairs to make phone calls. I'm going to find you legal help, safe temporary housing if you want it, and a pathway out of this nightmare. Marcus will face consequences for what he's done, but you're going to be okay. Why would you help us? Jerome asked quietly. He'd been silent until now, holding baby Sophie, his eyes filled with exhaustion and the particular wariness that comes from being failed by too many people. We're strangers, We're illegal, and we lived in your house without your knowledge. You're not illegal. No human being is illegal, I said firmly. You're undocumented, which is a civil matter, not a criminal one. And you lived here because my son exploited your vulnerability. That's not your fault. It's his. I headed toward the broken door, then turned back. Also, you're not strangers. You're people who need help. That's all I need to know. As I descended the stairs from the attic, my mind was already working through what came next. Calls to make, allies to mobilize, systems to navigate. Marcus had 3 days before he returned. In that time, I'd dismantle everything he'd built on exploitation and build something better in its place. My son thought he'd been clever, thought I was too old and too oblivious to notice what was happening in my own home. He'd underestimated his mother, and that was the biggest mistake he'd ever make. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, my ancient laptop, and a phone charged to 100%. Upstairs, 14 people waited for me to save them from the trap my son had built. The weight of that responsibility should have paralyzed me. Instead, it clarified everything. First call, Elena Rodriguez, immigration attorney I'd known for 15 years from volunteer work at the library's citizenship program. She answered on the second ring. Dorothy Williams, she said warmly. It's been too long. How are you? I need your help, I said without preamble. I just discovered my son has been running an illegal boarding house in my attic. 4 undocumented families, including children. Deplorable conditions. He's been exploiting them for 2 years. Silence. Then, start from the beginning. Tell me everything. I did. Explained the locked attic, the sounds I'd ignored, breaking in to find 14 people living in conditions that violated every housing code Detroit had. Detailed Marcus's threats about immigration, the cash payments, the way he'd weaponized these families' fear to keep them silent. Those families have options, Elena said when I finished. U visas, they're victims of a crime. Trafficking essentially. T visas possibly, depending on how coercive Marcus's behavior was. At minimum, we can get them temporary protected status while we sort out permanent solutions. Can you come here? Meet them? They're terrified, Elena. They think anyone official means deportation. I'll be there in an hour. And Dorothy, what you're doing, helping them instead of calling ICE or ignoring it, that takes courage. Your son should be ashamed. He will be, I promised. Eventually. Second call, building inspector's office. I explained I'd discovered serious housing violations in my property and needed an immediate inspection. They said earliest availability was next week. There are children living in an attic with 1 bathroom, inadequate ventilation, and fire hazards, I said firmly. I'm reporting this as an emergency situation. If something happens before you inspect, and I've already called, that's on your department. They scheduled an inspector for tomorrow morning. Third call, Child Protective Services. This one was harder. I was potentially putting children into the system, separating families. But I couldn't let kids continue living in that sweltering space without proper food, education, safety. The CPS worker who answered was professional and compassionate. We don't want to separate families, she assured me. Our goal is safety. If the parents are willing to cooperate, if there's no abuse or neglect beyond the housing conditions, we work with them to find solutions. We're not immigration enforcement. Fourth call, my lawyer, Patricia Okonkwo, who'd handled James's estate and my will. Pat, I need to revoke a power of attorney I gave my son, and I need to know my legal liability for what he's been doing in my house. What's he been doing? I told her, heard her sharp intake of breath. Dorothy, that's human trafficking. Elder financial exploitation, fraud, multiple felonies. You're not liable. You had no knowledge and he was operating without your consent, but we need to move fast. If he gets wind that you've discovered this, he could destroy evidence, threaten the families into silence, or worse. He's out of town for 3 more days. Then we have 3 days to build an ironclad case. I'm coming over. We're documenting everything, securing your property rights, and making sure Marcus never has legal access to your assets again. Elena arrived first, a whirlwind of professional efficiency and genuine compassion. She climbed to the attic with me, introduced herself to the families in fluent Spanish and competent Haitian Creole, and spent 2 hours taking notes. This is bad, she told me afterward, back in my kitchen. But it's also straightforward legally. Marcus committed multiple crimes. These families are clearly victims. We can help them. Will they be deported? Not if I have anything to do with it. Your visas take time, but with documentation of what Marcus did, and Dorothy, your testimony as the homeowner who had no knowledge, that's gold. We have strong cases. Pat arrived with her paralegal, a young woman named Jasmine who set up a laptop and started creating files. They photographed everything. interviewed each family with Elena translating, documented the cash payments, the threats, the conditions. "We need to talk about Marcus," Pat said, as afternoon faded to evening. "What do you want to happen to him?" I'd been avoiding that question all day. Marcus was my son. I'd raised him, loved him, believed in him, but he'd done something unforgivable. He'd exploited vulnerable people, endangered children, and used my home and my trust to do it. "I want him prosecuted," I said quietly, "for everything, the trafficking, the exploitation, the fraud. I want those families protected, and I want Marcus to face consequences." Pat nodded. "I'll coordinate with the prosecutor's office. With your cooperation and the family's testimony, they'll have more than enough to convict. Will I have to testify against him? Probably. Can you do that?" I thought about Rosa's 3 children, about baby Sophie in Jerome's arms, about the elderly Ramirez couple who'd been sleeping on an air mattress in a sweltering attic for 2 years. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." By 9 p.m., we had a plan. Elena would file emergency motions for the families, getting them temporary legal status as crime victims. Pat would notify the prosecutor's office and prepare criminal complaints. CPS would inspect tomorrow and work with the families to ensure child safety without separation if possible. And I would tell the families they could stay, temporarily, legally, with proper documentation, while we sorted out permanent solutions. The attic would be off limits until building inspectors cleared it, but my house had other rooms, 4 bedrooms sitting empty since James died, and Marcus claimed them weren't needed anymore. "You're putting them in your home?" Elena asked, surprised. "Dorothy, you don't have to do that. Where else will they go? Shelters? Separated? They've been through enough. My house is big enough for all of us until we figure out better arrangements." Pat smiled. "You're a good woman, Dorothy Williams. Your son's an idiot for not appreciating what he had." That night, I helped the families move from the attic to bedrooms, bathrooms, the living room. It was chaos, children excited to have space, adults overwhelmed by unexpected kindness, everyone uncertain if this was real or another trap. Rosa helped me make up beds, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this? You don't know us. We lived in your house without permission. You lived in my house because my son is a criminal who exploited your desperation," I corrected. "That's not your fault, and I'm doing this because it's right, because you're human beings who deserve dignity, because I spent 35 years as a librarian helping people, and I'm not stopping now." I fell asleep past midnight in my own bed, exhausted but certain. Tomorrow, the building inspector would come. The legal wheels would start turning. Marcus would return in 3 days to find his operation dismantled and his mother waiting with law enforcement. But tonight, 14 people slept safely in my home. Children in real beds instead of cramped mattresses. Adults in rooms with doors instead of sheet partitions. A baby breathing clean air instead of the suffocating heat of an overcrowded attic. Marcus had tried to turn my house into a prison for profit. I was turning it back into a home. The building inspector arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. His name was Gerald Martinez, mid-50s, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many housing violations and not enough consequences for landlords who created them. "Mrs. Williams?" He shook my hand. "You reported emergency housing conditions?" "In the attic. Follow me." I led him up the stairs, past the second floor where families were eating breakfast I'd made, past curious glances from children who'd never seen a building inspector. The attic door stood open now, sunlight streaming through windows no longer covered with blankets, illuminating the reality of what Marcus had built. Gerald stepped inside and went very still. Then he pulled out a tablet and started taking photographs, his face growing grimmer with each shot. "How many people were living up here?" he asked. 14. 4 families, for 2 years. Jesus. He crouched by an extension cord, followed it to a power strip overloaded with adapters. "This is a fire waiting to happen. 1 bathroom for 14 people?" He checked the plumbing, made notes. "Completely inadequate. No ventilation system, no emergency exits, structural modifications done without permits." He looked at me. "Ma'am, whoever set this up committed multiple felonies. This isn't just code violations. This is criminal negligence." "My son," I said quietly. "He did this without my knowledge or consent. I only discovered it yesterday when he left town." Gerald's expression softened slightly. "You're cooperating with authorities?" "Fully. I have attorneys involved, I've contacted CPS, and I'm working with an immigration lawyer to protect the families who were victimized." "Good, because I'm required to file a criminal referral. The prosecutor's office will want statements from everyone involved." He continued his inspection, documenting everything with methodical precision. "This space cannot be inhabited until extensive renovations are done. Proper ventilation, additional bathroom facilities, fire suppression system, emergency exits. Permitting process alone will take months. I understand. The families are staying in other parts of my house temporarily until we find permanent solutions. That's generous of you. He closed his tablet. Most homeowners in your situation would have called immigration immediately and washed their hands of it. These people are victims, not criminals, I said. My son exploited them. I'm not going to compound that by abandoning them. He handed me his card. You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Williams. I'll have my full report filed by end of business today. Someone from the prosecutor's office will be in touch. After Gerald left, I sat with the families and explained what came next. Elena had arrived earlier to translate and provide legal counsel. The building inspector confirmed what we already knew. The attic wasn't safe or legal, I said, which means Marcus will face criminal charges for housing violations in addition to everything else. But for you, this is good news. It's documentation that you were living in substandard conditions, which supports your visa application. Will we have to testify? Maria asked. Against Marcus? Probably, but Elena's filed paperwork that gives you temporary legal status as crime victims. You can't be deported while your cases are active, and your testimony is crucial, not just for convicting Marcus, but for protecting other families from predators like him. What if he comes back? Rosa's voice was small. Before the police arrest him? What if he's angry we talked to you? He won't get past me, I said firmly. This is my house. Marcus has no legal right to enter without my permission anymore. I've changed the locks. I've revoked his power of attorney, and I have lawyers ready to file restraining orders if necessary. Jerome spoke up. His English was heavily accented but clear. You are very brave, madame, to go against your son for strangers. You're not strangers, I said. You're people who needed help. And Marcus stopped being my son the moment he decided exploiting vulnerable families was acceptable. That afternoon, a social worker from CPS visited. Her name was Keisha Washington, and she moved through my house with an assessing eye that softened when she saw children playing with toys I'd pulled from storage. Marcus's childhood toys, saved for grandchildren who'd never materialized. The children seem healthy, she observed, considering the conditions they were living in. Their parents did their best, I said. Limited food, crowded space, constant fear, and still these kids are loved, cared for, resilient. Keisha interviewed each family separately, asking about Marcus's threats, the living conditions, whether children were being harmed. I waited in the kitchen, making sandwiches for 14 people plus lawyers and social workers. My kitchen transformed into a command center for dismantling my son's crimes. No evidence of abuse or neglect, Keisha told me afterward. The parents have been doing their best in impossible circumstances. As long as current living conditions are adequate and the children start school enrollment processes, I see no reason for removal. They can stay. They can stay. You're providing appropriate temporary housing, multiple adults are advocating for them, and they're clearly safer here than they were in the attic. We'll do follow-up visits, but, Dorothy, you're doing amazing work. By evening, I was exhausted. Elena had left with stacks of paperwork. Pat had coordinated with the prosecutor's office. CPS had cleared the children to remain, and 14 people were settling into my house like they'd always belonged there. Rosa found me in the kitchen washing dishes, insisted on helping despite my protests. You've done so much already, I said. You gave us our lives back, she replied. We can wash dishes. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rosa asked the question I'd been dreading. What will you do when Marcus comes home? Face him, I said simply. Tell him what I've done, what he'll face. Give him a chance to turn himself in before the police come for him. You think he'll do that? No, but I have to try. He's still my son, even if he's forgotten how to be a decent human being. I have a son, Rosa said quietly, 12 years old. When we left Honduras, he cried every day. Said he wanted to go back to his friends, his school, his life. But I told him, we left so you could have a future, so you could be safe, so you could grow up to be a good man. Is he happy now? He's alive. That's enough. She dried a plate carefully, set it in my cabinet like it was precious. Marcus is alive too, but he forgot to be grateful for it, forgot that being alive means more than taking what you can get. That night, I stood in my front hall looking at the chaos my orderly life had become. Shoes by the door in sizes ranging from toddler to adult. Coats hung on my rack in styles I'd never wear. Sounds of Spanish and Creole and English mixing in conversations I couldn't fully follow. My house had never been this full, even when James was alive and Marcus was young. It felt overwhelming and right in equal measure. I thought about calling Marcus, warning him what awaited, but Pat had advised against it. Give him no chance to run, no time to destroy evidence or threaten witnesses. He comes home to face what he's done. So I didn't call. I just waited. 2 more days until Marcus returned. 2 more days to prepare for the confrontation that would end my relationship with my only child. But I'd made my choice. I'd chosen 14 vulnerable people over 1 guilty son, and I'd make that choice again every single time. Perfeito. Vou finalizar a história com os capítulos restantes. 5:10. Marcus came home on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after I'd broken into the attic and 4 hours before the police planned to arrest him. I was in the living room with Rosa's children when I heard his key in the lock, except the lock had been changed, so the key didn't work. I heard him try again. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my son looking confused and irritated, his weekend bag at his feet. "Mom, why doesn't my key work?" "Come in, Marcus. We need to talk." He stepped inside and froze. The house that had been silent and empty when he'd left was now full of people. Maria's teenagers were doing homework at the dining table. Jerome sat in the living room with baby Sophie. The Ramirez family was in the kitchen making dinner, filling my house with smells of cooking that had been absent for years. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus's voice rose. "Why are they— Mom, did you let them out of the attic?" "I let them out of the prison you built," I said quietly. "Sit down, Marcus. We're going to have a very difficult conversation." "No," he backed toward the door. "No, I'm leaving. This is insane. You had no right." "I had every right. This is my house. You've been exploiting undocumented families, charging them $8,000 monthly to live in deplorable conditions, threatening them with deportation if they complained. You committed multiple felonies, Marcus, in my home, using my property." His face went from anger to calculation to fear in rapid succession. "They're lying. Whatever they told you, they're lying to save themselves from deportation." The building inspector documented everything. So did Child Protective Services. So did the immigration attorney I hired. So did my lawyer. I pulled out my phone, showed him photographs of the attic. "This is human trafficking, Marcus. Housing code violations. Elder financial exploitation. You used that power of attorney I gave you to try to refinance my house without my knowledge. I needed money. You were making $8,000 a month in cash. Where did it go?" Silence. "Then, I had expenses, business investments, gambling debts," I said flatly. "I had investigators look into your finances. You've been gambling online, losing consistently, digging yourself deeper into debt while exploiting vulnerable families to pay for it." Marcus sank into a chair, his face in his hands. For a moment, he looked like the boy I'd raised, frightened, lost, ashamed. Then he looked up, and I saw only the stranger he'd become. "What did you do?" His voice was cold now. "Call immigration? Get them all deported so you can feel righteous?" "I got them legal status as victims of your crime, got them safe housing, temporarily here, permanently elsewhere once their visa applications are processed, got their children enrolled in school, got them lawyers and advocates, and the dignity you tried to steal from them. You destroyed my business. Your business was a crime." I stood, trembling with rage I'd been holding back for days. "Marcus, you exploited people who were desperate. You threatened them. You endangered children. You used my home, the home your grandfather built, where your father and I raised you, as a tool for human trafficking. What happened to you? How did you become someone capable of this?" "I needed money. We all need money. That doesn't justify exploitation. That doesn't justify threatening to destroy families, keeping children out of school, cramming 14 people into an attic with 1 bathroom." Rosa appeared in the doorway, her 3 children behind her. "Senora Dorothy," she said quietly, "the police are here." Detective James Morrison and his partner entered my house with the courtesy of professionals who understood this was already a tragedy. They read Marcus his rights, while my son stared at me with betrayal in his eyes, as if I were the one who'd broken trust, who'd committed crimes, who'd chosen greed over humanity. "Mom, please," he said as they cuffed him. "Don't let them do this. I'm your son." "You were my son," I said, my voice breaking, "until you forgot that being my son meant something. Meant values, integrity, basic human decency. The person you've become? I don't know who that is." They took him away. I watched through my front window as they put him in the police car, as neighbors came out to stare, as my son disappeared down the street toward consequences he'd spent 2 years avoiding. When I turned back, 14 people were watching me. Adults who'd lived in fear for years, children who'd been denied education, safety, the basic rights every child deserved. "He was your son," Rosa said softly. "You gave him up to protect us." "That is, I have no words for what that is. That's choosing right over easy," I said, "which is what we're all supposed to do, even when it costs us everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on the second day, walking through discovering the attic, finding 14 people living in conditions that violated every standard of human decency, learning that my son had been the architect of their exploitation. Mrs. Williams, the prosecutor asked, how did it feel to discover what your son had done? Like losing him twice, I said honestly. Once to his crimes, once to the necessity of stopping him. Marcus's defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive mother, suggested I was exaggerating conditions to punish my son for imagined slights. But the building inspector's testimony destroyed that narrative, as did photographs, as did the family's accounts of Marcus's threats and the cash payments documented in his own handwriting. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read 16 guilty verdicts: human trafficking, housing code violations, fraud, elder financial exploitation, racketeering. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He looked at me once as they led him away, his face a mixture of rage and something that might have been grief. I felt nothing, just exhaustion and relief that it was finally over. But the work wasn't done. While Marcus served his sentence, I focused on transformation, of my house, of my life, of the families who'd become my unexpected responsibility. The attic renovation took 8 months. I hired contractors who followed every code, every regulation, every safety standard that Marcus had ignored. They installed proper ventilation, added 2 bathrooms, created emergency exits, put in a modern kitchen. They divided the space into 4 self-contained units, small but adequate, legal, and safe. Elena secured U visas for all 4 families. The children enrolled in school. Rosa's oldest started bringing home report cards with A's and B's. Jerome found work at an auto repair shop whose owner didn't care about immigration status, just skills and work ethic. Maria and Carlos both got jobs at a hotel that was hiring openly, offering benefits and fair wages. The elderly Ramirez couple at first had nowhere to go, too old to work, too vulnerable to live independently. I offered them the first-floor bedroom permanently, converted my dining room into their living space. They became my family, filling the house with Spanish conversation and shared meals and the particular warmth of people who'd survived hardship together. "You don't have to do this," Senora Ramirez told me one evening. "Keep us here. We are burden." "You're not a burden," I corrected. "You're family, the kind you choose, which is sometimes stronger than the kind you're born into." I also started something new, a resource center at the library where I'd worked for 35 years. We offered ESL classes, legal clinics, job placement services, housing assistance. I funded it with money recovered from Marcus's restitution payments and donations from people who'd heard our story. "You're doing God's work," my old supervisor told me at the center's opening. "I'm doing human work," I corrected, "helping people who need help. That's all." Rosa's daughter Sophia became a regular at the library, devouring books in English and Spanish, asking questions about everything from dinosaurs to democracy. She reminded me why I'd become a librarian in the first place, to open worlds for people who needed them. Marcus started writing to me 6 months into his sentence. The first letter I burned unread. The second I stored in a drawer. By the 5th, curiosity overcame anger, and I opened it. "Mom, I know you probably hate me. I deserve that. I deserve worse than that. But I'm writing because my therapist here says I need to take accountability, even if you never respond. I was drowning in debt. Gambling started as entertainment, became addiction, became desperation. When I lost my job and my apartment, you took me in without question. And instead of being grateful, I saw opportunity. The first family came through a contact who knew I had space. They were desperate, willing to pay cash, and I told myself I was helping them. But helping would have meant fair rent, safe conditions, legal contracts. Instead, I saw dollar signs. I saw a way to pay off debts while keeping you in the dark. Every time I heard you at the attic door, I'd panic, make up stories about structural damage, about needing privacy for my business. The truth was, I didn't want you to see what I'd become, someone who could look at desperate people and see only profit. The worst part? I was planning to sell the house, had already talked to real estate agents. Once the house sold and I had your money, I was going to put you in a nursing home and disappear with the cash. You, who raised me alone after Dad died, who worked 2 jobs to send me to college, who never once made me feel like a burden. I don't expect forgiveness, don't expect you to write back or visit or acknowledge I exist. But Mom, I need you to know, you did the right thing. Turning me in, protecting those families, choosing them over me, that was the right thing. That's who you raised me to be. even though I forgot it completely. I'm sorry for everything, for the person I became, for the trust I destroyed, for the harm I caused to people who deserved kindness. Your son, Marcus. I read that letter 3 times, then set it aside, didn't respond, didn't visit, just filed it with the others in my desk drawer, and went back to the life I was building. 2 years after finding the attic, my house hummed with life in ways it never had before. The 4 families had moved into the renovated attic, properly, legally, with contracts that specified fair rent, maintenance responsibilities, and rights that Marcus had never acknowledged. They paid $600 monthly each, below market rate but sustainable, allowing them to save money while living in dignity. The Ramirez couple remained on my first floor, insisting on cooking dinner for everyone twice a week. Those meals became tradition, Thursday and Sunday, all of us gathering at tables pushed together in what used to be my formal dining room. Sophia, Rosa's daughter, was now 10 years old and reading at a high school level. She wanted to be a lawyer, she told me, like Elena, who helped us. I want to help people like Elena helped my mama. You'll be brilliant at it, I told her, and meant it. The resource center at the library served over 200 families in its first year. We'd help people secure housing, employment, legal status, education. Word spread through immigrant communities that the center was safe, staffed by advocates who understood their fears. Elena recruited other immigration attorneys, creating a pipeline of free legal services. Pat brought in colleagues who specialized in housing law, employment discrimination, civil rights. The center became a hub, a lifeline, proof that systems could work if enough people cared enough to make them work. I also started speaking. Community groups, churches, universities, anywhere people would listen. I told the story of what Marcus had done and how we'd responded. Not to shame my son, though that was an inevitable consequence, but to educate people about how exploitation happens, how to recognize it, how to intervene. The signs were there, I'd say. Locked rooms, strange noises, people being evasive about their living situations. If you see something that doesn't feel right, ask questions. Offer help. Don't assume someone else will handle it. After one speech at a community college, a young woman approached me. My uncle has people living in his garage, she whispered. I think it's like what you described. What should I do? I gave her Elena's card. Call her, today. Those people need help, and your uncle needs to be stopped before he causes more harm. The woman called. Elena investigated. Within a week, 3 families were liberated from conditions similar to what I'd found in my attic. The uncle was arrested, prosecuted, convicted. One intervention leading to another, ripples spreading outward from that first moment when I'd broken the lock on Marcus's secrets. 3 years into Marcus's sentence, I finally visited him. Not because he'd earned it, not because I'd forgiven him, but because Dr. Amara Johnson, the therapist I'd been seeing since the trial, suggested it might bring closure I didn't know I needed. You don't have to forgive him, Dr. Johnson had said, but seeing him might help you process what you lost and what you've built in its place. The federal facility was 2 hours from Detroit, surrounded by chain link and guard towers and the particular grimness of places designed to warehouse people society has deemed unworthy of freedom. Marcus looked older, thinner. His hair was mostly gray now, though he was only 40. Prison ages people in ways freedom doesn't. We sat across from each other at a table bolted to the floor, guards watching, other inmates and their visitors creating a background hum of murmured conversation. Hi, Mom, Marcus said quietly. Hello, Marcus. I wasn't sure you'd come. You never responded to my letters. I read them. I just didn't know what to say. That's fair. He studied his hands. They were rough now, scarred from kitchen work he'd been assigned. How are the families? The ones from the attic? They're thriving. Rosa's daughter wants to be a lawyer. Jerome. They're thriving. Rosa's daughter wants to be a lawyer. Jerome runs an auto repair shop now. The Ramirez couple lives with me. Their family. I paused. The attic has been legally converted into proper housing units. 4 families are living there now, paying fair rent, with contracts and dignity. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. I destroyed so much. I had everything. Your love, your trust, a home, and I threw it away for gambling debts and greed. Yes, you did. Do you hate me? I considered the question honestly. No, I don't hate you, but I don't know who you are anymore. The son I raised wouldn't have done what you did. So either I failed as a mother, or you made choices that had nothing to do with how you were raised. You didn't fail. I did. He wiped his eyes. I've been in therapy here, gambling addiction support groups, trying to understand how I became someone who could exploit desperate people. And Mom, The truth is, I saw them as less than human, as commodities, as means to an end. That's what addiction does. It makes you see everything through the lens of feeding the addiction. That's an explanation, not an excuse. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm trying to become someone who deserves to be forgiven someday, even if that day never comes. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Around us, other families talked, cried, held hands across tables, prisoners and loved ones navigating the complicated terrain of relationship after betrayal. The families ask about you sometimes, I finally said. Rosa's children especially. They want to know if you're okay. Marcus looked shocked. Why would they care after what I did to them? Because children are generous with forgiveness in ways adults aren't. And because I told them you're sick, that addiction is a sickness that made you do terrible things, but that you're trying to get better. Am I getting better? I don't know. Are you? I'm trying. I've been sober. No gambling, no substances for 3 years. I work in the kitchen. I attend programs. I'm getting my GED because I dropped out of college and never finished. I read your letters to the prosecutor's office about the foundation you started, about helping other families. He looked at me with something like pride. You turned my crime into something good. That's who you've always been. I turned your crime into protection for others, I corrected. That doesn't erase what you did. It just means your victims didn't suffer for nothing. The guard called time. Our hour was up. Marcus stood, hesitated, then said quietly, "Thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve it." "No, you don't. But maybe someday you will." I drove home through autumn afternoon, my mind full of complicated thoughts. Marcus was still my son. That would never change. But the relationship we'd had, the trust, the closeness, the automatic love that parents are supposed to feel, that was gone, replaced by something more conditional, more careful. Maybe someday we'd rebuild. Maybe not. But at least I'd closed one chapter by seeing him, by acknowledging he existed even if I couldn't forgive what he'd done. It was enough, for now. 5 years after breaking the lock on the attic door, I stood in my backyard watching Sophia graduate from 8th grade. She wore her cap and gown with pride, her speech as valedictorian, inspiring and clear. 5 years ago, my family lived in an attic with no windows, no hope, no future. Today, I stand here as proof that one person's courage can change everything. Miss Dorothy saw people where others saw problems. She saw humanity where others saw illegality. And because she chose to act, my family and 3 others got to build lives we never dreamed possible. The audience applauded. I cried openly, not caring who saw. After the ceremony, Sophia ran to me, threw her arms around my neck. "Abuela Dot, did you hear? Full scholarship to prep school. I'm going to be a lawyer." "You're going to be magnificent," I said, holding her tight. My backyard was full now. All 4 families, plus Elena and Pat, who'd become regular fixtures in our lives, plus neighbors who'd watched this impossible family form and thrive. We'd set up tables under the oak tree James had planted 40 years ago, spread them with food from 4 cultures mixed with my own attempts at soul food that never quite matched my mother's recipes. The Ramirez couple had claimed one corner of the yard, where they tended a vegetable garden that fed half the neighborhood. Jerome's daughter, Sophie, now 5 years old, ran between tables with Sophia's younger siblings, their laughter the soundtrack to everything we'd built. Rosa found me by the grill where Carlos was expertly managing chicken and vegetables. "Senora Dorothy, you okay?" "I'm thinking about Marcus," I admitted, wondering if he's okay, if he's really changing or just saying what therapists want to hear. Does it matter? I considered that. I suppose not. He's not my responsibility anymore. These people are. I gestured at the gathering. This is my family now, chosen family, which maybe matters more than blood. "Blood means nothing without love," Rosa said. "You taught me that." The attic units were all occupied now. The original families had moved on to houses of their own, replaced by new families who needed temporary refuge while they established themselves. I charged fair rent, maintained the property properly, treated everyone with dignity. It wasn't charity, it was justice, finally. The resource center had expanded too. We'd helped over 600 families now, prevented countless exploitations, changed lives in ways that rippled outward beyond anything I could track. Marcus was up for parole next year. I'd already decided I'd testify, not for or against, just honestly. He'd served 8 years of his 12-year sentence, participated in every program available, become a different person according to prison records. Whether that person was genuinely reformed or just skilled at performing reform, I couldn't say. Elena approached with a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, professional clothing, kind eyes. "Dorothy, This is Miguel Santos. He's a reporter doing a story on community responses to housing exploitation. He'd like to interview you, if you're comfortable. What kind of story? I asked. The kind that shows how one person can make a difference, Miguel said. How you turned your son's crime into a movement that's helped hundreds of families. I thought about declining. This was supposed to be Sophia's day, not mine. But then I looked around at the people filling my yard, people who'd been invisible, exploited, terrified 5 years ago, and who now had jobs, education, legal status, hope. Okay, I said. But the story isn't about me. It's about what happens when communities choose to help instead of harm. When people see humanity in everyone, regardless of documentation status. We talked for an hour. Miguel was good. He understood nuance, didn't try to make Marcus purely villainous or me purely heroic. He got that it was complicated, that choosing to help came with costs, that transformation wasn't simple or complete. What would you say to other people who discover family members exploiting vulnerable people? He asked. Report it, document it, protect the victims first, worry about family loyalty second, because family that exploits doesn't deserve loyalty. They deserve accountability. Do you regret turning in your son? I regret that he put me in a position where I had to choose between him and justice. But no, I don't regret the choice I made. I'd make it again. As evening came and the party wound down, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Senora Ramirez, washing dishes while conversation hummed from the backyard. You are happy, Dorothy? She asked in careful English. Yes, I said, surprised to find it completely true. I am happy. You have good heart. God sees. I don't know about God, I said honestly, but I know about people. And the people in this house, in those attic units, in the families we've helped, they make my life meaningful. That night, after everyone had gone home or upstairs to bed, I stood in my front hallway looking at photographs on the wall. James and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful. Marcus as a baby, as a boy, as the young man I'd thought he'd always be. And new photos now. Sophia's graduation, the ribbon cutting at the resource center, Rosa's oldest son receiving an award at school, the Janvier family at Jerome's shop opening, faces of people who'd lived in my attic in fear and now lived in the world with dignity. I'd lost a son, but I'd gained a family. Not the family I'd imagined, not the one I'd expected, but a family nonetheless, built on choice, on mutual respect, on the understanding that home isn't where you're born, but where you're valued. My Victorian house, built in 1920 by my grandfather, had sheltered 3 generations of Williams' family. Now it sheltered more, a chosen family, a community, proof that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most unexpected blessings. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, past the attic door that no longer had a lock, just an ordinary door now, leading to ordinary apartments where ordinary people built extraordinary lives from the wreckage of near disaster. Marcus had tried to turn my house into a prison for profit. I'd turned it into a sanctuary for survival, and in that transformation, I'd found something I didn't know I'd been missing. Purpose beyond parenthood, family beyond blood, home beyond walls. The attic no longer held secrets. It held hope, and that was enough. That was everything. Thank you very much for watching. Share with those who also like stories, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Cheers.